Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Charlie Kirk and a new era of censorship.
Do I think we are at a turning point right now in society and with free speech? Yes, I do.
While the controversial right-wing activist built his brand on free speech, why those who've spoken out honestly about his record have been silenced. I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. Hi, everybody. Before we continue with today's episode, if you're watching us on YouTube or Spotify, please leave us a comment. What did you think about the reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination? We'd love to hear what you thought about this episode and what stories that you would like to see us cover next. And if you're listening to this podcast, check us out on those platforms to see us on video.
I'm Manisha Krishnan. I'm a senior culture editor at Wired, and I'm based in Brooklyn.
Awesome. Welcome to The Take, Manisha. We're really excited to have you on today. So a lot has gone down since right-wing political activist and Trump ally Charlie Kirk was shot to death. Now, we know that the alleged shooter is a 22-year-old named Tyler Robinson, who prosecutors say planned the attack in advance. Briefly, what more do we know about him at this point and his motive?
So we actually know very little about his motive. There's been sort of a scramble, to assign blame. But really, in terms of his actual motivations, it's still very unclear. We knew that he grew up in a Mormon family. His parents reportedly were registered Republicans, but he is not affiliated with either party. We know that authorities say that a lot of the bullet casings found at the scene had various memes carved into them. And there's been sort of a scramble to find a deeper meaning, I guess, to those, but they just seem to be kind of jokes, ironic jokes. In the charging documents that were released, they said that there was this text exchange between Tyler Robinson and his roommate where he allegedly confessed. And in that exchange, he said something along the lines of that he couldn't stand Charlie Kirk's hatred anymore. I'm paraphrasing, but still, that's not really like a clear motivation. And so, yeah, there's actually very little that we know at this time, despite various groups trying to sort of lay blame.
So we're speaking on Friday, September 19th, and the investigation is still unfolding. Investigations take time. But the other big story has been the reaction to all of this. We had barely learned Tyler Robinson's name when certain politicians and right-wing commentators, especially from the Trump administration, started shaping a narrative about all of this, blaming the radical left here.
We have to talk about this incredibly destructive movement of left-wing extremism that has grown up over the last few years, and I believe is part of the reason why Charlie was killed by an assassin's bullet wound.
Yeah, they're not only blaming the radical left, like they're blaming trans people. That's been a major focus of what they are talking about is that, this so-called like trans ideology or gender ideology, which is honestly a meaningless term. And so we're seeing with a lot of right-wing influencers blame this on a trans terror cell.
And some are suggesting that a terror cell, transgender ideology, is responsible for this attack, that it was not just a single individual.
They're also conflating this. They keep on hammering this idea that this is radical left political violence, and they're calling for action to dismantle left-wing groups. Trump, he's now mentioning Antifa.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday he was designating the Antifa movement as a terrorist organization.
At the same time, Kirk himself is being almost elevated to this saint-like status, which has been really interesting to watch.
He's a martyr for truth and freedom, and there's never been anyone who was so respected by youth.
Trump says that he's giving him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. There have been videos on social media of Kirk meeting Jesus in heaven. He's being pictured with like JFK and Martin Luther King. He's being praised as this spirited debater who, quote, was practicing politics the right way, which is what New York Times columnist Ezra Cline wrote. But Manisha, when you strip away the tributes, his record told a pretty different story. What did Charlie Kirk actually stand for?
I mean, I think it's interesting that he gets painted as this like free speech advocate. You know, what he was doing, honestly, came across as quite gimmicky, and it's just a part of the attention economy. Often the talking points that he used were pretty like typical right-wing talking points, kind of a very surface level type of debate. But, you know, he has said things, even right before he was killed, he was being asked a question about mass shootings, and he was sort of deflecting blame onto trans people and quote unquote gang violence, which, you know, we know is often used as a dog whistle towards Black communities.
Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years? Counting or not counting gang violence?
He's also said that if his daughter, if his child got pregnant, you know, via sexual assault, he would make her carry that baby to term.
So if you had a daughter and she was 10 and she got raped, and she was going to give birth, and she would and she was going to give birth and she was going to live, would you want her to go through that and carry her baby?
That's awfully graphic.
But it's a real life scenario that happens to many people.
The answer is yes, the baby would be delivered.
As far as the free speech side of things, he created like a professor watch list. And this was just sort of a list where you could kind of name professors who were, you know, maybe teaching leftist or liberal ideas. I'm sure that Charlie Kirk knew what the ramifications of a list like that are in this iteration of the internet and of society. It often can lead to people being threatened and doxxed. So I don't know that making a watch list of any kind is consistent with being a free speech, you know, advocate.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and some of his views were really, I to my ears, sounded kind of extreme.
If I see a Black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights.
So, Manisha, there's a lot of people who have called out Kirk's record in the aftermath of all of this, you know, given many of the distasteful, some would say hateful comments that he has made, but calling out his record has also turned out to be very risky for them, right? You know, there are the high profile examples like political analyst Matthew Dowd, who was fired by MSNBC after saying, quote, hateful words lead to hateful actions. Washington Post columnist Karen Attiah lost her job at the Washington Post for what she called performative mourning for Kirk. And maybe the most shocking one was Jimmy Kimmel, whose show was suspended.
Meanwhile, many in MAGA land are working very hard to capitalize on the murder of Charlie Kirk. Yesterday, J.D. Vance, who himself famously called Donald Trump America's Hitler, hosted the Charlie Kirk podcast from the White House, where he pointed his little mascara-stained finger directly at the left.
Now, I know that you've been reporting on other cases who have come out and, you know, spoken out against Kirk and who have faced consequences. Tell me a little bit about some of the people that you've spoken to and what's happened to them.
Yeah, so the one that really comes to mind is this trans horror author, Gretchen Felker-Martin. After Charlie Kirk died, you know, she referred to him as a Nazi on Blue Sky, and she was suspended from Blue Sky. But also she had a series coming out with DC Comics called Red Hood. And so DC has not only cut ties with her, so essentially firing her, but they've canceled the whole series. And when I talked to her, she said, you know, Charlie Kirk, he spent his life targeting people like me and the communities that I'm a part of. And, you know, she basically said, like, he was a monster and I'm not going to, like, lie about that in light of his death. And she doesn't feel like she should be punished for that. I've talked to a lot of people who feel similarly. They were part of a marginalized group that he openly targeted. I mean, there's plenty of video evidence. And so they don't feel like they should have to perform grief after his death.
And, whether you like the comments or not, it's her First Amendment right to express herself. And I think it's also worth bringing up, the guy who broke into the Pelosi's home and bludgeoned Paul Pelosi, fracturing his skull.
The suspect tried to tie Paul Pelosi up. He was hit in the head several times with a hammer, and it was Paul Pelosi who called 911. The intruder telling police as they arrived, "We are waiting for Nancy."
Charlie Kirk was online calling for someone to bail this guy out, and he didn't get fired or canceled for that.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be that. I mean, I think he said something along the lines of like, why is this person still in jail? I think what really stands out to me is that yes, some of these people certainly were mocking and kind of making fun of Charlie Kirk's death. But some of the comments were pretty like middle of the road, kind of benign statements about just the extreme and volatile political climate right now. I know a journalist who made a comment like that, and she was put on the top of a doxing list. Essentially, it was called something like Charlie's Murderers. She's been receiving, rape and death threats since. And she didn't even say anything really like about him. It was more just like the general climate that we're in right now in light of his death and political violence. So it just seems to be the standard is always changing, and it's just a shifting standard.
Shifting standard, maybe a double standard. After the break, more with Manisha.
Up to 100,000 children go missing in China every year, a number that links back to the 1970s and the one-child policy. This story is about one of those children and the mother who spent decades searching for him. What's happening to China's children? Hear the full story on True Crime Reports.
So, Manisha, what we're seeing here are critics of Charlie Kirk, as you mentioned, being silenced, punished, or losing their jobs. This is exactly the type of canceling that the right has been rallying against for years now. It also feels more extreme to me somehow, So I'm curious, what do you see as the difference between what we're seeing now, people getting punished for speaking out against, Charlie Kirk's record, and the cancel culture that the right has been talking about for years?
I think what we're seeing is, the state apparatus getting involved here. I think that's what makes it different from cancel culture, where it's just the public or members of the public being angry about something, and then there's a consequence to that. I think that we're seeing President Donald Trump make threats at different companies and individuals that he doesn't like, who are critical of him. And we are also seeing, people that he's appointed pretty much doing the same thing and encouraging it in a very brazen and open manner.
Earlier on Wednesday, the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, had urged local broadcasters to stop airing Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC. He suggested the commission could open an investigation as a result, and that broadcasters could potentially be fined or lose their licenses if there was a pattern of distorted comment. In a Wednesday social media post, Trump celebrated the decision, congratulating ABC for, quote, finally having the courage to do what had to be done.
And I actually think that that's really scary. And that's kind of very different from, the cancel culture that the right was talking about and complaining about a few years ago.
Right. J.D. Vance, Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, have explicitly threatened to use state resources to target, NGOs now and legal defense groups that are, framing these leftist organizations as a domestic terror movement.
With God as my witness, We are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks and make America safe again for the American people. It will happen, and we will do it in Charlie's name.
You know, like when they're starting to link Charlie Kirk's death to a left-wing terrorism network, I think that's something that really starts to ring some pretty serious alarm bells.
Yeah, and you know, with designating Antifa, quote unquote, as a terror group, I mean, what does that even mean? Like, it's not like it's a centralized group with a centralized ideology. So that's even scarier if you think about it, because if it's not like this centralized group, then ostensibly you could kind of call anyone Antifa, right? And maybe threaten to charge them. What often happens when governments make a terrorist designation is that they get a whole bunch of new powers. They get increased law enforcement budgets.
Surveillance budgets, even, which we've seen before.
Exactly. And so I think it's pretty alarming. So I just think it is really troubling what we're seeing happening right now. And it seems like Charlie Kirk's death is just sort of like a catalyst to go even harder on some of these avenues that we've already seen this administration pursuing.
It's been surreal to watch all of this unfold, but this is not happening in a vacuum, right? For the past 2 years, people have been blacklisted, fired, threatened with deportation for speaking up for Palestine, like activist Mahmoud Khalil.
The outspoken student activist was stopped and arrested by immigration enforcement agents as he arrived home Saturday evening, his pregnant wife by his side.
How would you put this moment and what's happening in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death in context? I mean, do you see this as part of a pattern?
It is part of a pattern. Anti-Semitism has been something that he has sort of used for increased enforcement, like even when approving people getting into the country, anti-Americanism as well. But I also think that when you go after pro-Palestine activists or even like journalists that we've seen fired, I don't know if it creates the same impact in the public as someone who's a really prominent celebrity. I'm talking about Jimmy Kimmel in this case. When you kind of go after someone who's more of a cultural touchstone, for better or worse, like the public kind of cares more or they pay a little bit more attention. And so I do feel like there is a moment happening right now that feels significant.
Yes. When someone like Jimmy Kimmel, who is a household name in the US, can get taken off the air, it starts to really feel like nobody's immune. I mean, this was a moment where I know my parents were texting me like, this is, Jimmy Kimmel has been suspended. Bringing it back to Charlie Kirk, Kirk's political organization was called Turning Point USA. Do you think that we're at that turning point now?
Do I think we are at a turning point right now in society and with free speech? Yes, I do. This is also part of the danger of having so many, big media monopolies, corporate compliance at the highest level. That might impact like several major media companies. I mean, even if you look at what's happening to CBS right now, where they've kind of like shaken things up with 60 Minutes, and now they're thinking of putting like Bari Weiss in there.
And Bari Weiss was, she was a blogger who was popular during COVID, right? Because she took a sort of like anti-vaccine stance.
Yeah. So now that's happening at CBS. And if you look at, why Paramount may have sort of complied to Trump, it had to do with a merger that they wanted. And we're kind of just seeing this play out. And I mean, it is scary because I think a lot of these corporations actually could be fighting back and they're not. They're choosing not to, perhaps because they want to get, some deal pushed through that the FCC is overseeing. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it is kind of disturbing to see how companies seem to be capitulating to Trump. And unfortunately, those companies own so much of media and the messaging and the narratives that go out in this country.
So I guess, just kind of as final thoughts, regardless of whatever anybody thought about Charlie Kirk. Obviously, no one, he shouldn't have been murdered for his political beliefs. But I'd like to hear your sort of final thoughts on how his death is being used in this moment for maybe broader political aims.
Charlie Kirk, obviously, he was a very big deal in Republican circles. He was a huge fundraiser. And of course, he did galvanize a lot of young people. But he has now been elevated to this kind of martyr status. And I think that part of the reason for that is just that, he represents an opportunity to sort of double down on some of these harsh crackdowns that we're seeing on dissent, on criticism of the Trump administration, and on free speech itself. And so I think that is a very worrying trend, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down.
I guess one of the fears, too, is the ways in which this could chill speech, right? Like people could start to, as a result, because they're afraid of being fired or punished or targeted in some way. Is that a fear that you have?
Absolutely. I mean, it's probably risky for me to even be talking to you right now because I am not an American citizen. I will have to get my visa renewed at some point. And, they're going to be screening our social media for quote unquote anti-American sentiments, which again is a very loose term that could mean anything. But I'm guessing that it means being critical of this administration.
We know that it does feel like a risky time to be speaking out, and we're all going to have to follow the story and see where it goes. Manisha, thank you so much for coming on The Take.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.